This is a Spiral Volley, is a primary clear skill, Deadeye. We are a full elemental crit, frenzy charge stacking with the Deadeye sentences, and I wanted to give you guys an overview of how this build works. I've seen a lot of talk that the frenzy charge stacking is not in a good place. I think it's a lot better than people think because a lot of the people are using physical conversion. But I'll demonstrate to you how I solved some of the problems with elementals, some of the problems with frenzy charge stacking, and some of the problems with overall the the elemental ailments, proccing elements consistently enough that we can blow up the screen. And so, just to go over quickly what Spiral Volley is. Spiral Volley is a attack that when you cast it, it creates a big AoE around you. What it does is it chains once per frenzy charge consumed, and deals a crap ton more damage per frenzy charge consumed. On this build, we can get up to 6 frenzy charges, which means it can chain up to 6 times, and there's an ascendancy on the Deadeye passive tree that lets us go. That gives us a 50% chance to double the number of frenzy charge consumed. And so what that means is that this becomes 12 chains with like 600% more damage. Obviously, that's really crazy. We're not always at that mark, but quite a bit of the time we are. And you'll notice that you don't actually need to always cast with this much. The damage on this build is high enough that I can kill and clear tier 16 with just 1 frenzy charge. And that's even with pretty unfriendly mods as well. And so the way this build works in order to generate frenzy charges is 2 things. We are using Combat Frenzy. And so what this does is every time you do an elemental ailment, and a hard elemental ailment like freeze, electrocute, or pin, you generate a frenzy charge. And so because we run this with perfusion, so that if our ascendancy here, this 30% chance to gain maximum misses, we can still get 2, which is still very good. And then you also get another 5% chance to gain maximum here on the tree. Go ahead and turn global off real quick. And then the other thing is we're running Sniper's Mark. So you'll notice that Combat Frenzy has a cooldown of 5 seconds. If you put quality on it, I think that goes down further. It just doesn't show in the tooltip. When I looked on the Fexture Life Wiki, it said it does go down, and it feels like it goes down, so I'm just going to say it does. It might be broken, who knows. So during that 5 seconds, we can't recast our ability or will not hit another frenzy charge. And so what we do is we run Sniper's Mark, and if you run Sniper's Mark with the +1 to uses, the second wind, run it with second wind and with cooldown recovery rate, and then you run it with these things so that casting it basically doesn't feel like anything. You basically are able to ping pong between the two, and what that will look like is when I hit my first mod pack, I can cast. It will use Combat Frenzy because I proc elemental elements on them, and then the next pack, if it comes within that 5 seconds, I cast my mark, and then I recast my Spiral Volley, and then by that point my Combat Frenzy will be back up, so I can cast it again, and then I go back to my mark, cast, and then I cast again, and then mark, cast, if this comes off a cooldown at a time. But generally you get 4 to 5 recasts. You get 4 to 5 casts back to back, and then if you pair that with the fact that mobs themselves are not that dense, and the cooldown of the ability is like, if you wait, for the 5 seconds, it's more like 3.5 after the cast. It's more like 3.5 after the cast. You'll find that you actually don't need to use the mark that often. I maybe use it about half the time compared to just using the Combat Frenzy off of its cooldown. But yeah, so, and then the other question is, how do you solve single target? So because we stack so much freeze and we are full elemental, we are actually able to use a rain of arrows on a lot of enemies. This includes rares, bosses, and this just deletes them. I literally freeze them in like a few hits. Usually it's actually first to point out that Spiral Volley in general will kill a lot of the rares in mob packs anyways, just because the number of chains you get is crazy. It goes up to like 12 chains, You're gonna blow up most rares in the mod pack. If they survive, you'll hit them with a few hits, then you cast random arrows on top of their face. Because they're frozen in place, you can kill them very quickly. This also will consume your frenzy charges, so you don't always need to use it, but when you do, especially on a boss, for example, you use Sniper's Mark, Rain of Arrows. I even put more duration, freeze duration on Freezing Salvo, so that when we hit them, they'll be frozen for a lot longer, and they'll be able to eat the full 12 frenzy charges worth of duration on their Rain of Arrows. You'll sort of see it sort of funny. The Rain of Arrows will sit there for like the longest number of time. If like it'll last longer than the enemy will sit there or be dead, basically. So, anyways, the damage is pretty good. For my primary, I am using Stormcaller Arrow, and this is the primary way that I'm getting the initial elemental ailment. And then also, this becomes my single target and general purpose, sort of auto attack type of thing. It says 10k on the tooltip here, but that's just the arrow itself, and you'll notice it's actually enough to kill a lot of enemies, but our actual tooltip is more like 40 something, maybe 50, you could attack a few times. But yeah, and so what that does is this just gives us a way to clear pretty quickly. You can use LA, to basically clear out mobs, to clear out trash as well, but in general I prefer Stormcaller Arrow because it feels more impactful. Elemental elements scale off of the damage dealt that's proportional to that element. So because the hit is so big, you end up getting pretty much guaranteed elemental ailments on a lot of enemies just based off of the bolt itself. Assuming you don't get that off of the initial impact. But yeah, so just going through, Freezing Salvo, pretty obvious, pretty busted. Running Wind Dancer, with Cannibalism, Herbalism, and then Herald of Thunder. So on the Herald of Thunder, actually, I've been running Electrocute. So our Herald of Ice is really strong. We have AoE, we're using Biting Frost. I'm even giving it to Infuse. The damage on Herald of Ice is already strong enough that running a second Herald is a little bit overkill. So what I've done is I use Electrocute and the Neural Overload in order to get basically a secondary defense layer. You'll see enemies that survive will end up being like electrocuted forever. Pretty funny. And then I just put Calling Strike on there because why not? This gives us another way to sort of clear up the trash. But yeah, I think overall that explains the skills. So let's go into the gear. So notably, we are not Fizz Conversion at all. We are just fully flat elemental. And so what that does, or I guess there is some conversion, but we are primarily elemental. And the way that we did this is the rolls on the weapons themselves are sort of trash. And that's okay, because what you can do is you can use the affixes on the other parts of your gear in order to get a lot of that flat that you're missing. Like notice here that we're getting like 71 lightning damage. This gives 46 lightning damage just on the ring itself. And so notice like more than half of that damage is coming from our ring. And then again, you can get gloves like this. This again is more than half of our cold and lightning being added here. And then because it's an elemental weapon and we can socket a bunch of runes, we can get like a crazy, what is this, like 140% elemental with attacks. We have a lot of percent scaling from here. And obviously the quiver itself, the cold, lightning, and then crit. And the other thing that is sort of hidden necessary, but if you actually play the build, you really smooth it out quite a bit, is the mana gain per kill. This ends up being more than like the 2% that you can find on jewels. And then what it does is when we're clearing breaches or any other general clearing will feel a lot better with mana on kill, because you won't have to hit your mana flask while you're generally clearing. Only when you swap to single target mode you start chugging and hitting the enemy. And yeah, so just to sort of explain that pretty much everything here is pretty standard, just Chaos Life. Because I'm running so many auras, we do need another source of spirit. You don't need to actually run as high of a spirit of an amulet or a ring, and you could get spirit on the chest plate, but you'd be missing out on the evasion goodness. Just to sort of show you here. So you could run these herald points here to reduce the reservation of your heralds, and that would let you have lower rolls or maybe not have this ring altogether. I'm not exactly sure. Definitely some room to play around there. So I guess while we're here, let's take a look at the passive tree. So we're doing Tailwind just because it's busted, but honestly, we're not the best use of it. 3% less damage taken per Tailwind is a very strong stat line, especially when everything that kills you is a one-shot in endgame. Obviously, we need to run the Frenzy Charge nodes. There is some world where we spec out of this. I think this might be nerfed at some point, in which case you could spec into this one as well, and that would make your primary clear, especially if you're running a dual string, like 3 projectiles, and that will feel very good for clearing. On top of that, they'll give you a secondary on top of Spiral Volley. And yeah, so we take some Frenzy Charge nodes. I don't think you need more than 6 Frenzy Charges. This, as it is, feels very good. I'll show you later, but you pretty much chain cleared multiple screens to left and right. No reason to actually spec in more. I think maybe if the content becomes harder, it might make sense. And then in general, what we're specking into is Shock Chance and Freeze Chance. This makes our elemental elements much more consistent on harder enemies. So we're doing penetration here, penetrate, and then we also have shock chance, and then we get another freeze chance up here. And the freeze chance I think is more important. In general, when it comes to gear, actually I would try to prioritize cold, try to have it on the higher roll, because that ends up feeling better for Herald Device. And then yeah, run this node because it's busted, crit chance here. But pretty much everything is as you'd expect for an elemental boast. Pretty close to the LA tree, other than we're taking a lot of crit. Oh, and then the jewels. I don't expect you to have jewels like this. I hit some lucky slams, but these things are pretty important. I'm sure these things give us a pretty large amount of damage. Yeah, you'll see we're going from like 10 to 11. That's pretty close to 10%. You have 3 of those on, it's a crazy amount of damage to get from a single jewel. I do recommend picking something like this up. Having baseline high damage on this build is pretty important. It feels a lot like Tornado Shot or any other elemental boast in PoE 1, in which you really need to have a high amount of damage for the build to feel good. But yeah, I think I will go ahead and stop the recording, and I'll pick it up and show you some actual clear. I made this tier 15 with 75% max life, just to sort of show you that the damage is very far up there. So keep in mind, I'm intentionally gimping the build just so you guys can see that I'm not short selling or I'm not overselling the damage that the build has. Yeah, so let's go ahead and pop this into Woodland Mansion. I just woke up, so I might have some skill issue. There is a, what do you call it? There is a skill to managing the cooldowns on the Frenzy Charges. I noticed this morning that there's some patch notes about making Frenzy Charge changes. It seemed like a buff. If that's the case, this build will go from good to great, and I really think this could be in the meta. So let's go ahead and proc our first thing, cast, blow up. So we're just going to go ahead and show you that I'm ping-ponging between the two. So sort of weave between the mobs, get between the packs. Oh, this, okay, life and defense is alright, this won't. Just sell it. But yeah, you'll see that most of the mobs, you're sort of off-screening. You don't really have to look at them. Yeah, and breaches, especially in really dense stuff, it gets pretty crazy. I don't think it's higher clear than a lot of the meta skills right now. Or I guess it's probably the LA is still better, but I think that's on the biggest. That's on the chopping block for possible nerf, and because this is on the chopping block, this is on the buff list. Perhaps that might be a reason to do this over other things. But yeah, so I'm really just ping-ponging between the two. I played this build quite a bit, so I'm pretty used to the timings on the two things, and the timings get easier with timings get easier with higher level gems because the cooldown on Combat Frenzy goes down with quality and level. But yeah, so that was the breach. I will probably slow down a second just to show you what I'm doing here. I won't even loot. Let's just go ahead and show you what we're doing. Okay, so just to make it very explicit so people understand what's going on. So I have Frenzy charges on me, my Combat Frenzy is off cooldown. So when I cast... What the... Alright.
Don't mind if I do.
When you cast, it will come off it would be on cooldown. Sorry. Okay, now it's on cooldown. I'm watching the timer hit Q, which is my mark, and I get it back. And now my Combat Frenzy is off of cooldown again. And then I can cast again, and back, mark, cast, mark, cast, cast. Okay, so we're at the boss now. I'm going to come in with frenzy charges like we're mapping, but it actually doesn't really matter because you use Sniper's Mark to generate anyways. I think I'll just show you quickly that the damage is pretty good for map bosses. It's definitely not meta tier, but I would say it's up there. So let's go ahead and hit him, start chugging my blasts. And we want to teleport. I'll pop my rain of arrows, keep moving. And that was it. So basically all I did there was I froze him, made sure my frenzy charges up, and then I ran arrows on top of his face while he's frozen, and that was just enough to kill him, I think. Okay, so I want to leave this off with a few notes, just some thoughts about the build. So in general, you actually don't even need Spiral Volley in order to clear. You could use LA to clear on a full elemental setup. The same premise is all the same. I do think though Spiral Volley ends up feeling really, really good. Mixing the two, I think, is like a skill thing, and you'll find that mixing and managing the cooldowns along with using your primary attack of choice ends up adding up to a pretty fast clear experience. The other thing I want to mention is the price of the build. So I think I got most of this gear for under 500x, and a lot of this gear is pretty nutty. Like 500x sounds like a lot, but for the type of gear that this is, it's sort of cheap, honestly. And I like this, like these gloves are only 15. I want to say this, like the quiver was 30, maybe this was like 20. That's incredibly cheap for gear that seems near perfect. Right now, I think crit elemental is so underused by the meta that this stuff is very cheap. However, I'll note that I pretty much ended up going through most of the supply on the trade website because I was experimenting so much. So the fact the supply is so low worries me that if any amount of elemental crit were to become popular, this build would become very expensive. So just keep that in mind. This probably build is not for a new player. It definitely is not for a budget. I think you need a lot of interesting gear to make it work. Definitely not SSF friendly. But yeah, I think a few other things also is the damage is very high that I think you could actually gimp the build for... Once I figured it out, I realized that you actually don't need that much damage in this build to start clearing. I do think that a lot of this gear could be swapped out to MF instead of just the damage. Like, I think if you swap this for like going from this lightning roll to a a rarity roll, I think would be just fine. Only having one additional source for damage, I think, is more than enough to get you through, especially because this is a clear speed build, I would say. So bossing is not really our prerogative here. We don't have to worry too much about our single target. Just to show you quickly what my stats are, I'm level 90. There is some difficulty in balancing the dexterity and intelligence between the two because this is like a 212 dex bow, along with running Herald Device, which has level 20 is probably going to have over 100 intelligence requirement. So keep that in mind when you're building. Resistances, they're sort of low right now. I definitely could get more chaos. This build has a lot of room to prove, not even using all the sockets. Yeah, like there's a lot of wasted space in this build as it is currently. This definitely can be improved, but however, I don't think it's going to be cheap to build it out, especially if the type of build gets any type of popularity. for 2200 life, 1400 evasion rating, which is decent, but not enough to run acrobatics, I think, outside of bossing. But yeah, one more thing I want to note. I think Thorn sort of screws this build. Because we're so reliant on, we such high damage, and and we need to save our proccing of the ailment for the refresh of our combat frenzy. If an enemy hits you with thorns on, it will proc the elemental ailment, and it will consume your frenzy charge on that proc, or it will generate the frenzy charge on that proc. When we want to generate it on our spiral volley, so I do recommend not running this. In hindsight, I had no idea that this would be a problem, but now that I've played the build quite a bit, it's quite annoying to deal with. But yeah, I think that's it. Just hover all my gear really quick. It really is just sort of life and resistance with some spirit, and then the only differences is the ring and gloves, and the weapon, of course, is all elemental crit. And then just to show you that what I'm currently running is a crit chance of 30%, approaching 370 crit bonus. And then on Spiral Volley, we are running Inevitable Critical. I'm pretty sure this is because PoE calculates crit on the cast itself, which means that this crit chance, it tells you here, you'll see that it goes to 42%, and when I recast it, it's not really showing. I think this is bugged. Oh no, it's because I haven't crit yet. Because I haven't crit yet, but this will go back down to 37 when it crits. But I think this is a good quality of life because 42% crit rate is actually quite high, I would say. And hitting half of your spiral volleys on crits just gives you, again, evens out the RNG of this build. Hitting a crit on, like 1 or 2 frenzy charges will still feel very impactful. I think in general you tend not to have dead casts on Spiral Volley. But yeah, I think that's it for me. Thanks all for watching. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll post my gear, and I think we're using Mobilytics or something to post their gear. But yeah, thanks all.